Welcome to episode 63 of the Filmumentaries podcast. It's Jamie Benning here, sitting in my freezing cold office. It's late November 2022 and the heating is well and truly off, thanks to the cost of living crisis. But I do have a wide range of jumpers or sweaters or whatever you want to call them, so I'm doing all right. Thanks for joining me again, or perhaps for the first time. If you are new to the podcast, there are 62 episodes that came before this one. Check them out, but not until you've heard this one. It's a big one. But before I get into that, I just wanted to remind you that this is a very independent podcast. It is just me, my laptop, and a guest, sometimes guests. If you enjoy my work, and it is work, albeit work that I love, then please think about supporting the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/Jamie Benning. And for about £12, you could support the podcast for an entire year. And depending on what tier you choose, there are certain perks, bits of merch that you'll get too. If you follow me on social media, you'll also know that on the 20th of November, my friend Patrick and I launched a Kickstarter campaign for our documentary called Not Your Average Joe. It's about the life and career of production designer Joe Alves. He's well known for his work on Steven Spielberg's Jaws and Close Encounters, but what you might not know is that he also worked for Disney. He worked on Sleeping Beauty. I mean, it's bonkers that he's still around, 86 years old. He worked for Rod Serling, Universal, was friends with Paul Newman. They liked to race cars. There's some great stories there. He also worked for John Carpenter on Escape from New York and on Starman as well. And what's amazing about Joe, apart from being the nicest guy that you could meet, is that he has this amazing private collection of items that he's collected throughout his career. Storyboards, blueprints, photographs, paperwork. I mean, it's incredible. It really is incredible. And Patrick and I have full access to Joe and his archive. We're also hoping to interview more of his colleagues. We have spoken to one of his best friends, which I'll tell you about another time, and make a lasting record of this man's achievements. As you know, I'm super passionate about recording film history, and Joe's story is one that really needs preserving. There are lots of surprises in his story that you wouldn't expect, and we'd really appreciate your support. Here's the trailer.
Okay, so what do you want to know?
I really don't think that Joe has any idea the impact of his contribution to the industry. He weaves in and out of various film and TV projects that would stagger the mere mortal. Spending time with Joe is like walking through the annals of Hollywood.
I worked in the industry for such a long time. Well, guys, look, it doesn't stop. This is stuff, it goes on and on and on. Look at all this old shit. Each project has its own problems. Part of working on films, part of being a designer or a director is the challenge of making that. Oh, this is a good one. The t-shirt. Can you believe the 2 extra shots that Stephen wanted? Right here, show me the way to go home. Boom, boom. And then Stephen had a hose. We had a camera here. You find a way. You do the best you can. And the best you can is probably the best it is because nobody else is doing it. I mean, you don't need any more dialogue. You don't need anything. It's over. Quint's dead. The shark's dead. These guys are going to go off to another life.
Is it true that the art director is the one that chose Martha's Vineyard? Yeah, the art director came down and looked at the entire eastern seaboard.
When I finished Jaws, and somebody said, what do you want to do next? And my answer was, what's the next project? You want to just keep working. Anyway, Stephen came with a script called Watch the Sky.
I'd written in the screenplay there needed to be some kind of a very significant natural geological structure.
So Stephen developed the script. I drove 3,000 miles looking for a strange mountain. Today you Google it, right? You don't drive 3,000 miles.
And I remember you toured the whole country, and then you went to a place I never heard of before called Devil's Tower, Wyoming. And it was just sort of instantly the iconic image that brought everybody to the landing zone.
He said, you know, I feel like I'm stealing from you guys. You're giving me all these ideas. And I said, Stephen, that's what we do. We suggested, you're the director. If you want it, fine. If you don't, we'll find something else.
Your contributions to the actual design of the base of operations, it's one of the most extraordinary sets, certainly to this day, I have ever been on.
Look, guys, I just came across something here called Escape from New York. I did a lot of storyboards for that movie. These originals. As designers, we take the words and we make them happen. We create environments, good environments, bad environments, scary environments, Western towns. We do futuristic towns. We do spaceships. We even design sharks.
Just a great honor to know you and to be inspired by you. And I love you, and thank you, Joe Alves.
You can back us from £10 from the kindness of your heart, all the way up to £5,000 if you want an in-association credit at the start of the movie with your company's logo. In fact, we've had 5 people sign up for the £1,000 tier already, which is the exec producer tier. That's proved more popular than the £10 one. Who knew? But everything helps, honestly. If you can just put in £10, that would be fantastic. In between those tiers, you'll find one to suit all pockets. You could get a Blu-ray. There's a collector's Blu-ray box set, including a poster and some stickers and some extras. There's signed storyboards from Escape from New York and Jaws, replica ones, of course, but signed by the man himself. Check it all out on Kickstarter. Search for Not Your Average Joe, and I'll also link to it in the show notes. If you've ever enjoyed any of my Filmumentaries before and wanted to say thanks, this could be the equivalent of buying me dinner. I'm cheap. This is really your chance to do that, while also getting some cool stuff in return. Okay, back to the business of episode 63. I managed to get in contact with ILM VFX legend Dennis Murin. He owns more Oscars than any living person. All of this is thanks to a friend of mine who put in a good word for me. Thank you, Mark. So grateful to you. Dennis and I chatted a couple of weeks ago for about an hour and 40 minutes. Rather than ask him the same old tired questions, I really wanted to talk to him about his approach and about some of the VFX sequences I've enjoyed the most and how he went about producing them. More to get a measure of the man himself rather than the sort of technical details of what he worked on. But as usual, I did begin with the how it all started question. So here's my chat with Dennis Murin, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Dennis, what were the films that sparked your imagination as a kid? I know you've told this before, but I think it's just good to set the scene for everybody that's listening.
Well, I've tracked it back to when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I saw in a movie theater, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which is a Ray Harryhausen film with the giant, dinosaur-like creature in New York City. And the same year, this sort of in 1953, War of the Worlds came out. And I think that was like 2 weeks or 2 months earlier or later or something. And my mom, for whatever wonderful reason, took me to see those movies, probably because I wanted to as a kid. I don't know why. And I really remember those just vividly. And I think that just kind of shocked me into the sense of wonder and just what the heck is this? And stuff I'd never even thought about, giant creatures and alien invasion and rays coming out of these spaceships, supposedly coming from Mars. I wasn't even sure what Mars was probably at that age. But I remember walking out of the theater and wanting to still see that stuff in the real world. And of course, it wasn't there, So I wanted to go back in and see it again, even though it was terrifying. There was something that was really appealing to me about it. And I don't know what it was, but there were a few of us in LA and all over the world, I'm sure, that had exactly the same feeling, whether we were that old or younger or whatever. There's that first time or second time when you see something and you're just hooked into it, and that's it.
Did your mum take you to the movies often then? Was that a family kind of thing? Or did she make you see other movies, like, as a payoff for seeing some of the movies that you want to see?
It sort of was. I mean, my dad worked all day in downtown LA, and she would go down, and she would sometimes, well, not necessarily to see him, but we would go down, but she would want to shop. And I had no interest in shopping. And in downtown LA, I got to tell you, that's where the movie palaces were. The Los Angeles Theater and all these massive theaters, most of which are gone, but some are still there. They would have like 3 shows, for 50 cents all day long. So she literally could drop me and a friend off for, 4 hours, and I could see 2 of these movies. And sometimes she would stay with me, like she did on The Beast and War of the Worlds. But other times, I would see, a Harryhausen film or 2 of them in a row down there, in an afternoon, and she'd be off shopping at, the Bullocks or Broadway or whatever the clothing stores were around there. So it was great for me. And, the theaters would be practically empty. And these are 1,000-seat theaters. And the prints were often, in pretty bad shape. Now, for War of the Worlds and The Beast, had just opened. So I saw those under better circumstances. But where I really got into seeing things more than once and realized you could see it more than once was down there.
When was the moment you decided to kind of, right, I'm going to find out how this was done. I'm going to experiment myself. I think any of us who've recently watched Light and Magic saw some of that wonderful old 8mm and Super 8 footage of yours, of your early kind of attempts at matching your screen heroes.
Yeah, I started out wanting to do that with a still camera. And of course, everybody had a still camera. Their parents had one for travel and all. And I tried doing a flying saucer flying in the air, and had a little model that you could, plastic one that you could buy, and put that together. And I somehow realized you could hang it from a string, I don't know what, and went outside and I was hanging it from a clothesline or something. And I got the camera right and I could shoot it. So probably when I was about 6 or 7, I was doing stuff like that. And that's like the moment of like setting it up and shooting it, but the after results of that where you have to before you have to load the thing in the dark and unload it and get it to a camera store or a drugstore where they would do the same thing to get it processed to look at a week or 2 later on. That was all part of it. I mean, part of the whole thing back then. And it forced me and other people I've talked to about this to sort of keep the stuff in your mind. You enjoy the moment out there doing it, but you're trying to bring back an image you saw in a movie or something you'd imagine sometime, and there's no way to visualize what that is. And I think we really learned when we saw these films about, I know I'm never going to see this again unless I can get my parents to drag me to see it, and then it goes by. And that same sort of thing. So we sort of learn to keep these in our mind. And a lot of that stuff, that's why it's really copies of either the kind of the placement of things in the movies or the ideas of what I saw in the films, was just to try to imagine what they would be like if you actually kind of did them. And but in the process, developing this way to sort of be able to keep an image in your head, thinking about it over and over and over again.
Yeah, interesting that kids today probably wouldn't be so adept at doing that, what with the amount of stimulation they have.
Well, they don't have to anyway. Any scene you saw or anything in a movie, you could probably go ahead and find it online or something and grab the whole clip and look at it forward and backward and up and color and change it.
But I wonder what holding that image in your mind actually does to your kind of creative mind,
I think it made a huge difference. And I think that doesn't mean for the better, but at the time we all had that. I mean, the directors I've worked with that are around my age, they can do it. The cameramen I've worked with, they can do it. I can be right here and say, well, look, if we put a 50mm lens over there and we shoot at like f4.5 and your focus is 8 feet away, which is about where the actor should be for your shot you want to do, it should look pretty good. And we all knew that after 10 years or whatever it is of doing this. So you don't have to set it up because you already know. You talk to anybody, reading any of the Hitchcock books. He already knew all that stuff, and that's Hitchcock. It wasn't even the cameraman, but you kind of know it, And is it necessary now? I don't know, because I've had that discussion with people before, and it may not be anymore. Why? When you can go and you can grab frames and show the director, here's what I had in mind exactly, as opposed to trying to describe it and draw it or set it up and show it to him or something. But maybe that's one of the reasons that a lot of stuff looks like it's copies, because we literally can copy it. It's not fleeting anymore. It's there to grab, and then everybody knows exactly what you're doing. Oh, we're copying this, But you change this and that, and you don't really think you're copying it. But I was copying, so we're all copying,
Yeah,
it happens in any art form.
Yeah, but when you were copying these guys, you not only tried to replicate what you'd seen on the screen, but you even contacted some of these effects veterans, didn't you? When was that? When you were a teenager still?
No, that was long before that. I remember probably 2 or 3 years after War of the Worlds. So I was like about 8 or 9. My mom, I lived in La Cañada, which was outside of LA and kind of near Burbank and Paramount. All the studios at that time, they must have been about 25 minutes away from where I lived. And a lot of the families in the 30s and 40s, the film people had moved up to La Cañada, which is like a suburb, it's a middle-class suburb. Up nearby, you could drive down a couple of roads and get to Disney or to Paramount or RKO or anything and work there. But all the women belonged to these social clubs. So my mom knew a lot of the people. She knew, I don't know if you know Card Walker and Ollie Johnson and Frank Thomas, the Disney folks, and that she knew the wives and the social side. And they would talk about how, our husbands aren't paid enough, and by the way, we have to make all these scrapbooks because we're going to be selling these at the raffle coming up next Saturday, for the Tuesday afternoon club, dance that's coming up for the cotillion girls. They're going to be graduating junior high school. It was all together. It's all a regular part of life. And I didn't ever relate that those images on the movies that I was seeing was from the right people. But she said, I know this guy, the wife of, I think his name was Froelich, Edward Froelich or something like that. And he worked on War of the Worlds. So, and all I was number, call him up. So I put this off for weeks and weeks. And this is like 6 or 7 years old, calling him up. And there he was, there's the voice. And he was an electrician, which means he was one of many, many people that were making sure people didn't get killed and the lights were on, but I didn't know any of that stuff. And he was just really nice, but I didn't even know what to ask or anything like that. But that was one of the times I realized that these are, they're made by people. Now, what I didn't know for another 5 or 10 years is what they did actually to make the movie. When I got older, I'd see movies shooting around LA somewhere. And by the time I got to the age where I could drive, I would always stop and watch and, zero in and, I recognize that actor there. Oh yeah. And a bunch of people are mulling around. Okay. And what's going on there? There's a few people. What are they? Oh, they're standing. Oh, that's the camera. They're all standing by the camera talking and just looking around. And I thought, I'd like to do this, but that's where I want to be. I want to be where that group is that's standing around the camera and I don't know, because they're making it, I guess. I didn't even realize that was what was going on, but that's where the creativity is really happening in the skills that I liked, It wasn't where the actors are over here or anything.
And do you think that's something kind of innate in you, that you were open and like a sponge kind of soaking this in? Or was there a conscious decision on your part to be like, right, I'm going to learn what this is and what that is and kind of put the puzzle together?
It wasn't conscious at all. It was later on when I had to actually try to get a job, it became, because there was no way to get into the business because I wasn't in the union, and I would be like, 18 or 20 or 22 years old. And it's a dead end. There was no way to get into it. There weren't any effects films really being made, a very few that were made non-union, like Time Machine kind of was, but anything like War of the Worlds from that period, those big movies were all done in studios, and there was a closed shop, and there was just no way to find any work in those at all. So then I really started getting more serious. Well, how do I get into it? And I have to, you need to join a union. Well, what's a union? Well, this is where we try to keep all the people working So we don't want people just coming in and lowering their price and getting a job and throwing somebody out of work, which makes total sense. But there was no entryway to it in those days because the effects industry was not growing. There was hardly any industry at all. And, apparently the departments that were made up from the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s that did effects films, there would be a handful of people that were sort of bosses, that they were be an artist and a cameraman and then maybe an optical guy if there were optical printers in it, a few people. And they would then bring in from the regular departments, like the construction department, they would make the models. And the plasters would sculpt the models. And other people that were needed would be brought in from the regular crews that worked on all the other films. So there wasn't a staff except for this handful of people at each of those studios. So whenever you see those big MGM movies or Paramount or anything, there's really, if you see one name, well, there's probably was about 6 or 8 main people that were employed all the time, and the rest were a few that were there a lot, but mainly brought together a lot to make the equipment, to make the models, to build the sets, to set the lighting up on it and everything and all that sort of stuff. So it was a dead end, and there were a few effects houses in the 50s and 60s that did like effects for small little bits that the studios wouldn't do. And one of them was Cascade of California that did commercials. And there was also Film Effects of Hollywood that was run by Lynn Dunn, who had worked on King Kong, and Joe Young and a bunch of stuff. And these guys had gotten out of like the studios but kept a small group together to do the shots the studios couldn't do. They were just too small, or titles or something like that. So anyway, I got to know Phil, very luckily, who ran the department, Phil Kellison, who happened to move in up the street from me. And through a series of crazy circumstances, I met him, and I was probably, I don't know what I was, 12 or something like that. And he had actually worked on this movie, The Giant Behemoth, that I had seen in the theater that Willis O'Brien had animated and did the effects for. That's the guy who did King Kong, and I kind of recognize his stuff. And Phil even had one of the models that was used in the Behemoth of the giant head of the Behemoth that sort of comes out of the water. And he had the puppet of the Behemoth, which I now have behind me, which he gave me. And it was just, a crazy set of circumstances. And he was running the company that did these commercials, and they were well-known ones, Pillsbury Doughboy and Alka-Seltzer and paper towels and all that stuff. They still do them, but they don't do them with effects. They did back then a little bit with effects. Now everything's effects, So eventually he gave me a chance to work there. And that's where I got to know Jim Danforth and Dave Allen and Tom Sherman and Ken Ralston and Phil. All of us kind of found ourselves at that place. And it was all, and we learned all from Phil, who was a cameraman, but he ran the whole place. So he would assign the different 8 of us to different areas to do, someone would do stop motion, this person would light here, and this person could light it and also do stop motion, and that person could do paintings or something like that. And Cascade was running for like 10 years or more. It's really successful there. And I was in there and out over that period. I wasn't there full time, except for right near the end of it. But we learned everything. But what we learned was the old school of filmmaking, which was literally back from The Lost World and King Kong. There was no money to build anything. There was no need to even think about how you would improve this process, because you had everything you needed. You had your cameras, you already had your lights that were all there that had been designed 40 years before. And you knew about stop motion to move things, and you knew about how to make wires look invisible, and you knew about how to light. Like I was thought about Phil, he could take a dirty old quarter and light it to look like it was a piece of gold, through photography. And we learned all these different things like that, but all old school. And we were really stuck in our ways. And then out comes something like 2001. They're saying, what the hell is this? And I was probably 22 or so, 23 when I saw that. And that I didn't know what I was seeing. But a lot of my gang thought, well, that's just weird, and some of us didn't. And I was one of those ones that said, well, it was weird, but I don't care. That was the story. That was the story he was telling, was something like that. But look at this. reality of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I got interested in that and still didn't know anything about kind of how it was being done. But I met Doug Trumbull, who was back from there a couple of times, and Doug was a regular person, and stuff like that. And I knew somebody who'd kind of known Doug, and he was a few years older than me, but he was an artist and happened to get onto this project over there. And a lot of that technology came from England. I mean, it's not talked about much, but I think I don't know if it was Wally Deaver or Tom Howard, or those guys had assembled these like ways of doing stuff with more precision and repeatability for a lot of the British TV shows. I guess mainly that Space 1991 or whatever it is.
1999, yeah.
99, right. And there are a few other stuff. So that most of that, from what I know, hadn't come to LA yet. Because we had a whole town had their own way of making films, but it was changing in the early 70s, when Francis and George came in and rebels were filmmakers were making their own kind of stuff. Well, it also happened with CG, I'm not CG, this is a way with technology. And there were people open to it. And for me, I'm, rambling on here, but John Dykstra was the big guy that really did it for Star Wars, saying he could put together something that he kind of had picked up from Silent Running, working with John, and he had done some research here in California at UC Berkeley for a camera, a little tiny camera on the end of a long snorkel lens for previewing architectural model, like driving through a city, what it would look like if you were on the street, looking in a car looking at it. So he made this whole robotic camera thing. That is what the Dijksterflex was. The next step, he was right before that. He just pushed to do this. That happened because you had a director like George who said, no, I don't want to do it that way. I've seen this movie and it looks fake, and I've seen that and it looks fake. And for a director, it's a dogfight sequence that we're shooting with spaceships. If I was a cameraman, I want to be able to look around just like those guys did in, World War II. They're flying in their airplanes and they're sticking their head out of the window and they're trying not to get killed. And they've got their 16 millimeter Bell and Howell camera and they're trying to follow the airplane as it goes by to see if the bullet is fire that their plane is going to shoot is going to knock it down. They can see maybe some reason like that.
Interestingly, I work in motorsport television, and our cameras have got so good, our camera operators have got so good over the years at following a car that it stops looking fast. So they're actually told now to loosen the head on the camera to make it kind of look like we're trying to catch up with it, and give it a whip pan, whereas before you probably could have achieved a smooth pan. So people are still striving to create that sort of kinetic, look to a film and that energy, bring that energy to it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's amazing stuff going on with technology now to be able to lock those images. It's just fabulous, and it's going on in sports events. So
yeah, it's getting crazy. But going back then, what Dykstra brought was this kind of elegance in a way that allowed you to be able to repeat these camera moves and to stack multiple images upon each other. So while at once you're kind of using the precision of a computer, you're still striving for the kind of handheld look that you just described. How do those two things kind of meet?
It's really interesting looking back on my stuff, and you look at any of that stuff that's on, Light and Magic or anything where that's a fraction of my home movies, but I'm always putting in a moving camera. And I'm always putting in something that looks like it's a byproduct of the process, which I used to see in movies or in real life, you'd see it. So that is always something that's been in me. To help make it look more real and to feel more like a documentary, but to be your audience. Like, I'm trying to see this at this danger zone. I'm not just going to put a camera there and show it, because I used to see that all the time in films, and it would just be a tip off. Oh, the camera's not moving anymore. Something's going to happen. Boom, it does. The creature walks in. Come on, And George wanted to be able to move the camera around to follow these things. Well, that meant that, hey, I can add some of my sort of feel to it, like you talked about, the ship comes in the shot quick and you start panning, but you're late and then you have to catch up with it. Right. That's exactly what it would have been. And he was fine with it. George just thought, boy, that adds a little something extra to it. It wasn't the conception of it, because the whole thing was made just to be able to do the pans, but that's what, a cameraman or somebody can add to this. Once you get a technology there, that technology may have been made for one thing, but we're curious species, people are. And, if you have a clear idea of what you want and it's appropriate, they were totally open for me to put that sort of stuff into it, wherever I can. And I've always done that. I've got stuff that I did, when I was like 20, flying. I've seen flying over Mars. I did for some space movies where you're looking down at a crater on Mars. And the goal was to have a shot of the surface of Mars and some craters like meteors that hit there also. And a friend of mine, Tom Sherman, made the model and 4 feet wide and the painted backing. And I did like 200 or 300 of these shots for these shows. And that was one shot. And I thought, if we're talking about a crater, let's do something you haven't seen before. Let's make it look like it was shot from a helicopter. You're up above looking down. And so I did this, you're up above looking down, going around the crater looking. I had probably seen a shot like that of the Arizona meteor crater here in the States, and that's what I wanted to put into data reality. So that, and the stuff that has been on TV, they've been showing, there's the same with my good friend, poking a stick and a hand coming over a fence. Well, notice the camera's tilting up in that, and the camera's actually panning over as the hand goes across the frame. I'm always putting that stuff in it to the point where I don't want to do it unless I can add that stuff to it. So part of the solution means to get that solution, to get that shot, I've got to have a way to be able to move the camera like that, or else it's not going to be the shot I want to do. So, once this motion control stuff came in, and it just like opened up for me, oh my God, you can do anything now as far as the camera moves, at least, which I really just love the camera stuff. So
I heard Phil Tippett talking about how, I think it was something you did for Tom Spina or something like that, where you were there for a short while for the call and then you had to leave. And Phil talked afterwards when you were gone, and he was kind of saying about, Phil was saying about how the kind of process of filmmaking back then, doing effects back then, you'd shoot something, you'd send it to the lab, you'd get it back. It was almost as if, if you were learning the piano in that way, it'd be you pressing the keys with no sound, and then like a few days later hearing the sound back, which is
a great example.
Just kind of boggles the mind, really.
It does. Well, it's not quite as bad. Who was it? Beethoven that was deaf, by the end. But he didn't have to. I'm sure for any of those guys, probably they didn't even need the sound when they were young. Once they got it, they're past that. They're all there, and they're not really hearing; they're feeling. So whatever those keys are, they are giving them feelings, and they know how these complicated feelings to generate them by pushing those keys. It just happens, and what they're doing is audio. It could be anything. They're just trying to make some sort of complicated feeling that changes from this to this, and then this feeling comes in, and that goes in. You're surprised here. You slow down to relax because it's been under too much stress. Now we're going to slowly build it back up. It's all feelings. So I at least got, and Phil, any of us got some feeling from the shooting of it, and it's there, but it's not what the end result is. And it's true, getting it back, a week or two later, and having to go in the dark room on your 8mm projector, 16, and you don't want to scratch it. They scratched all the time. They could tear the film because it wasn't incredibly strong. You had to splice it because there was stuff you cut out. And you put like Scotch tape over it to hold them together. That was all just part of the process. But getting rid of that just meant that, but that part of the process slowed down the learning tremendously, because you had 2 more weeks of school before you could try it again or look at it. But once we got into this, where we had instant feedback, which we sort of did on Star Wars by being able to shoot these rough black and white versions of the shots and process them in a closet, and you could sort of see the motion you did like 15 minutes later. That was great. And then once we started getting videotape recorders or digital tape recorders that we could do something and look at it immediately, that's really what you're sort of seeing in a lot of the stuff in Dragon Slayer, where we could really control and look at every frame of film before we shot the next frame. So you could check the setup of the puppet, move it to the next frame, compare it to the previous frame, and the previous frame and previous. Now, I don't know if we could stack the frames at that time, but you could see the progress in our minds if we couldn't stack them. And we could have traced them on the screen, and Phil could have looked at it, or Ken, whatever, and seen if the puppet was in the wrong place, if that arm should be down and not out to the side as much as it is, So that was a huge step in learning. And that, of course, is everywhere now with computers. And I think I know personally, the learning speed that my mind has sped up with in the last 30 or 40 years has been incredible. And I can't imagine how the kids today, how fast that's learning, because they're beginning that at like 6 years old or younger. That learning process. I want to know right now. Well, why do you want to know right now? Because you want to know now so you can go somewhere else or make it better or whatever.
I know some editors that kind of, balk at the speed at which things can be rendered on a timeline now, because they that was their thinking time.
That's so true, and that could be changing things. And it could be now you're reacting instead of proacting.
Yep.
No, it's very easy. Look at and you look at it it looks fine. It looks really good. But if you've been having to build that up carefully, you would have been thinking that whole time, which is the way it was always done before.
Yeah, I guess maybe there's more of an instinctive reaction now. I want to talk about that instinctive kind of thing in a moment. But there's one question I just had about Star Wars, and I'm not going to go over the same questions you've been asked before, because we can all go and look at Light and Magic and 100 other interviews. But one of the things I don't think I've ever seen answered anywhere is, on Star Wars, how often did you have the option or the chance to see the dailies of the live action footage? Because you're kind of art directing a different movie. You're making an effects movie. George is back in England at Elstree creating a live action movie. How did the two marry? Like, where was there a chance to see the dailies in live action, or were you very much embedded in the effects and rarely saw it?
No, we saw a little bit, but we didn't see very much. George did not want us to take the time to see it because, we had a 10-hour workday, right? And I understand that. Also, there was an opportunity or a chance then that we would start thinking about something else, which was none of our business. Now, it could have been our business, and eventually later on, we got into Empire, but mainly into Jedi. We were I was, and we all were. We were much more included in the filmmaking process. But at the beginning, George didn't even want any of us over on the set at all on the first Star Wars. I mean, I was a low position. I was just the second camera guy in that. But, Richard Edlund didn't go. I don't even remember if John went to the first unit shoot anywhere, So the camera guys were kept away. Everybody was kind of kept away. That changed a little bit in Empire. But I think the main thing was there was a history. And I was part of it, being on the other side, but it was for good reason. You bring a camera guy who's got this technology background onto a live action set where they've got a schedule they've got to make, and they've got to get their shot for an effect. And you start saying, you really shouldn't pan the camera in this, because we can't do it. We can't put the matte painting into it, or we can't line this up. And it's very true, we couldn't. So then they would, oh my God, okay. Then they lock the camera off, and someone would say, it's not locked enough. We need some sandbags so nothing bumps it. And then you get these sandbags, and all this is taking up time. And the director and the camera guy, the real cameraman, they are sitting there saying, I lost the energy of my shot or whatever, but at least it's going to look real now. And then, eventually George grew to trust us. There was a reason why we should be there. And I was especially really open to trying something new all the time if we could do it. A whole crazy way of looking at it. I started seeing things not from the point of view of an effects guy, but from the point of view of the director, which is in fact the point of view of the audience. And I hadn't really thought about that, even on my old home movies. I wanted to show them to people, but they were my point of view. And when you think, you're making these movies not for myself or my friends, but you're putting a film out there and you've got to make $100 million back, these expensive ones. You're screwed if that isn't accessible and if the audience doesn't like it. So you can put yourself into it, certainly, but to some extent, it wants to be something that is going to certainly surprise the audience, but be within something that they can will not be drawn out of or taken out of by suddenly seeing, oh, it's an effect. You know, gee, I thought she was in such danger, but I don't think she was really in any danger anymore. If you could keep that danger feeling there, then I think the film's going to be much, much more successful. And I think that's a dawning I came to during Empire and later on, you know, and Dragon Slayer and other stuff, where the movies were so expensive we were doing, you really didn't want to take out or remind people you're seeing a movie. So everything has to be in this effect shot, has to look like it's done by the same crew. It's in the same mood as the way the actors are shot. The lighting is the same as when the actors are shot, the fluidity of the camera, the open vision, if it's all like lock-offs, like something like a Godfather, or if it's moving around a lot, like a lot of other shows were done, you know, that should carry into the effects work also. That's the mood that they're making for the audience.
Yeah, I think, you know, I always remember seeing some of those early Harryhausen movies on TV here. They would show them like on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon here, and I would be kind of terrified by them, because you're right, that marrying of different techniques to make sure there's like a seamlessness to it, like where a spear would leave an actor's hand but go into a stop motion animation beast, or an axe would be left in a like Medusa's chest or whatever it is, you know. You suddenly, as a kid, you suddenly think, hang on a minute, there's something real about this, you know, there's a continuousness about it. I think that's really important. One of the other things I was going to ask you about was, there's that now famous photo of all you guys and girls sat in the screening room during Star Wars. I'm wondering, like, I've taken a guess over the years, I'm wondering if that was you guys all laughing and smiling at the reshoots of the Cantina sequence. I mean, I'm not asking you to. Yeah. Is it possible that's the case?
I've got no idea. You know, I don't know. There was just fun. There was terror, and there was also fun during that time. You know, and there would be, you know, sometimes shots would come on that would just be ridiculous and didn't work at all. But, you know, we would do a number of takes, even when we're doing stuff that still is like high speed. Not everything is these precise motion control motor stuff. There'd be stuff that there was still a chance of something going wrong. It'd be really funny. The Cantina shots, they were so fun because they would just go on and on. And, you know, George shoot like 2 minutes of John Berg in this thing and say, okay, now pick this up and, you know, and now try drinking it. And of course he couldn't drink it, but he had to pretend to. And then, you know, and Rick was, funny thing, Rick, you know, I mean, George wanted anything, and Rick said, you know, I got a dragon head or a demon head, you know, with horns and stuff like that. Is that appropriate? You know, I mean, it's space movie. Sure, George said, bring it in, and it's in the film. Yeah. So it's like a half werewolf or devil sort of thing that wasn't made for the movie, and that could have been. I mean, I like to think that was what we were laughing at, because we all knew. And you know, I tell you, George was the first guy in there laughing at it also. But he would also be saying, you know, that'll work, because who knows what's on this other world? Sure. You know, and it's something you haven't seen. It's not those same 8 creatures over and over again.
Yeah. One of those shots that has always kind of blown me away that you did, Dennis, is that, well, one of the opening shots of The Empire Strikes Back, when you have the Tauntaun running across the snow plane there. And you talk in Light and Magic about sort of George challenging you with this, just think about it. And you're saying, well, it can't be done, but okay, I'll think about it. And within 15 minutes, you kind of figured it out on this kind of almost instinctive level, where you didn't even realize you'd figured it out, but you were just kind of open enough to let the solution kind of present itself. I still am a little unsure about how that shot was achieved. I mean, there's that diagram in Light and Magic. So there's the West Cam like heli footage of Finzer, right? And then there's a Tauntaun that you can animate stop motion,
and that's just full in frames.
Yes,
it's just running in place, right?
So it's running in place, and you've plotted every single movement of that West Cam. Is that what you've done?
Yeah,
and match that on motion control.
And what you're looking at is the frame of film of the Tauntaun playing back that program that we plotted. Mm-hmm. So it's like this big in the frame at the beginning, when you do it, like that big. And then the camera moves into the actual frame of film, because that's the best quality. I didn't want to project it or anything. I said, let's just photograph that film and move it in until it's like that big in frame. So it's a way of plotting the motion. It's so essentially, I thought of a way to say it easier, but we turned an animation stand into an optical printer.
Right. Yeah.
And
okay.
you're photographing that film and you're repositioning it every frame. Now it's very similar to what was done in cartoons with Tom and Jerry stuff and Gene Kelly, and something where you see a little character dancing with Gene Kelly, you know, and it's a cartoon character. Well, if you look at that, the camera's always moving around because that's what the director said. And Gene Kelly, I'm doing it that way. You guys figure out how to do it. But they had to plot the animation so it lined up so the character always looked like he was standing next to him and on the ground and getting bigger and closer if he's running forward or back. So it's the same kind of idea as that. And they probably would have done those actually on animation stands also, but instead of photographing a piece of film, they were doing it, they were drawing how big the character should be and where it should be. And then the animator would go in and draw the character and paint the cells to be kind of either in that position, or they would position it later on when they shot the cells, and then do it as a map, front light, back light. And I did mine front light, back light also. So when we shot the Tauntaun, we do three frames. We had one frame of the Taun against black where it was lit up. Another frame, we turned the lights off and had a white card behind it, which, you know, right away shot that. So we had our silhouette map. And then I had another little white table that plopped up underneath it. That was the shadow, because that shadow was critical to make it look like it's on the ground. I didn't want it to look animated or any weird artifact like that. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that the mention of the shadow there, because it's little tricks like that kind of fool our perception, I guess, and make us buy a shot without even thinking about it. You know, we buy it, we're into it. And one of the shots that, and I'm leaping ahead now to Jurassic Park, but one of the shots that I still think looks absolutely incredible is that T-Rex coming out of the shadows, you know, between the cars, because I don't know what, I've wondered, I've kind of pondered on whether one of the reasons why that shot looks better than the other shots in the movie to me and holds up better, is it something to do with our perception? I mean by that CG back then had this kind of almost like a wet look to it, like a reflective quality almost to it, like some of the skins on the dinosaurs back then. I'm wondering whether our eyes and our minds buy that shot because it's raining and because it's dark. And I don't know, I've not really put it under the microscope. I don't know if there is CGI rain bouncing off the skin of the T-Rex there, but in my mind there definitely is. And I don't know whether it's because of that, the look that CGI had then, that makes me buy that or not. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I can't say a word. It's all a secret. Oh, no, it's a good point. I know we were going to try some sort of little speckle or something on the skin. I don't know if it ever worked out or if it's in that shot.
Yeah.
Or if we needed it. We may have got it all together and we said we don't need it. But I don't think anything like running water or anything like that. And the comper was Joe Letteri on that when he was at ILM. So, you know, you got a great eye looking at it. And the original thing when I shot the plates was I shot it all clear with no smoke. And then we shot 4 more without moving the camera with various levels of lights on and rain. And then, you know, Stephen gave me another 10 minutes to do that. So I had these layers of rain and haze against, and everything else would be black for those various layers. And it wasn't like, you know, I was being real picky. I just needed something that I knew I could pull parts from and we could do it in the comping. And as we started comping that shot, this is the reason I think it really works too, is that I have a thing I've always done, and I started sort of in Dragon Slayer that I call peekaboo. And there's a shot in that when the dragon is coming through the tunnel and you can hardly see it, and then it gets lighter and you can start to see it and it comes out of the fog. And this is the same. This was an opportunity for that. That wasn't anything that we had talked about with Stephen, saying we want it all kind of hidden and you'll start seeing it, because this is an action scene, right? You want to get into it. But as we started comping it, and it got better and better, the harder it was to see it at the beginning, it just looks scarier because it's not all there. And whether it's the little rain you're seeing or not, I think that helps probably if it is there, but there's always rain falling over it and behind it. But there's also this peekaboo, and that comes with how much flash, how much brightness you add to the blackest part of that character. And by the time we got to that show, we were rendering in 3D space, so we could actually render the tail a lot denser and hazier and practically white. And we got up to the snout of the T-Rex, it could be black, like it's in smoke. And that was all it could be done to the rendering and using the Z level on it and assigning numbers to each one of those. So we rendered it that way, and fiddling with the comping, just came up with this better and scarier shot that evolves. And I just love evolving shots. And all the time since I was a kid, because they're more real. Like you're out there looking at it. I don't want to know what's going to happen. I just want to be entertained, right? So if this thing is coming out, then that's better than just, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it was. I think your mind then fills in the rest.
Yes. Yeah.
And maybe that's what it was. And if you ever talk to Joe, ask him if we had water running down the skin, but I don't know if we did in that shot or not.
Yeah.
We did try it. Did try it.
No, it's interesting though you say about the evolution of that shot and bringing up that dragon slayer shot, because that's another one that you instantly buy that dragon. It's real. And I'm seeing it for the first time here, and it's all its glory. And you think about the Tauntaun shot that I just mentioned, that again has an evolution to it. You start up here and you end up coming in, and then we cut to the tight shot. Another of the shots that I'm always amazed by is that kind of shot in front of the van or the car that Tom Cruise is driving in War of the Worlds, and the freeway is kind of disintegrating behind, and the lorry is landing on there. And again, that has a real evolution to it. I remember actually watching that movie, as I did with Jurassic Park as well. I realized I'd been holding my breath through those sequences.
Great.
And it's really important, isn't it, to have that kind of evolution and have that shot go somewhere that kind of fools our perception and allows us to kind of, believe it and fall into the film. Because the last thing you want to do is for people to go, oh, that's a great effect shot. It wasn't until I saw it for like the third time that I went, wow, that was a great effect shot. Before I was just in the movie.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite shots I've ever done, and I got a call. I'm going to get a call from Pablo Hellman, who shot the plate for that, New York, saying, oh my God, Steven wants to do this crazy shot, pulling back, following this car and the things by this freeway. And I've been at the location. I knew the layout and everything on it, but he wants to do it all in one continuous shot. What do I do? Do we pull it back and get the car to LA and do it green screen and lock the camera on the front of the car? We could. Do we, but I said, no, so let him shoot it. Let his mind give us something that he thinks good. He may not have it all fleshed out, but he did know, I'm trying to think of what it was. He knew he wanted the bridge to actually coil up like a scorpion tail. So as the rays are shooting, they would start on the left side of the frame and come to the right. The whole thing would curl up. And then when the road straightens out at some point, I don't know if he had an idea what would happen then, but he knew things are going to blow up in chaos, everything. And I like to punctuate stuff, right? So once we got most of the bridge knocked over, I just thought, now when you think, oh, I can take a breather, boom, that truck's going to fall down behind you. And you think, oh, this isn't over yet. And then the idea of the houses just blowing up. And if you notice them, that on the left and right side, they don't just blow up. They blow up right into the middle toward the street from the left, the right one from the left side of the street. Actually the whole background on that, all those were, a lot of that was models of the explosions, of course, and the tanker falling. But they just were great ways to add that, what I was saying, that, the evolution of a shot as it evolves. What do I want to see next? Oh, I'm comfortable. No, I don't want to be comfortable. Boom, add something else. And we could add anything to it. Steven was just totally open, and luckily we share some sort of similar vision. So often something that he likes, I'll like, and I'll like, he likes. So we can work together on something, and he's very open to it. So he's a great guy to work with. All these top directors are visual people.
Yes.
And I get along with them, or else I wouldn't continue working with them. There's got to be something where we have a same sort of story sense or image sense or whatever it is, or mystery sense. I did talk Steven out, though, of the bridge coiling up like a scorpion tail. And we tried some versions of that. And, it's a concrete bridge, right? And it's got big old beams in it. Maybe I'm being too logical, but big metal beams in it. I didn't think I could ever get it in CG to look anything other than like It was made of, I don't know what, something plasticky or clay or something, but not like that. So I said, well, what if we break it where the real breaks are, which is over the pylons? That's where the real metal comes together, and they have to weld it and everything. And we'd had the earthquake here in San Francisco, and I'd gone down and actually visited the Bray Bridge that broke away in parts to see it. And so I knew how these things were made. Now you can every time you see something like that, you look at it and say, well, of course, but you never thought before that actually how it was made. And I think that helped the shot. I don't know, doing it. But I like the idea of that scorpion tail, because he's trying to put something into it that's different. Yes. That sort of thinking is really important. Imagine the saucers, the alien spaceships in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, if they had looked like round flying saucers that you've seen in every other movie. Just imagine with that. They'd all be up in the mountain looking at it at nighttime, looking out over the vast countryside. And here comes this round saucer coming in with maybe some lights on it, and as opposed to it's all lights and it's a mystery and their faces on them, So I love that original kind of thinking that, whenever that happens, it's great.
Yeah, it's amazing to sort of marry those two things, isn't it? Because you've got those, you talk about Stephen and his scorpion tail idea with the freeway, and, it's a stylistic thing. It's trying to add some extra element to it. Whereas, quite a lot of the time effects have strive to reach a sort of photorealistic world. But a film like Close Encounters, I mean, I don't think that could be done better today, because it's part of that film. The look of those effects are what make, or one of the things that make that film a fantastic movie, because you buy it, but it's also stylistically beautiful, isn't it? And Doug Trumbull was, again, one of these visual masters that you talk of. What was it like working with Doug?
Yeah, Doug was great. Those ideas, as far as I was know, they were Stephen's ideas. I don't know if you've seen his flying saucer film that he did in 16 millimeter, his Alien movie.
I've not.
I think it's on the documentaries, the big doc that he did about 5 years ago, or someone did on him. And there's scenes from it. And there were just lights out over the desert. And I said, and there may be like faces. And I thought, oh my God, this was all Stephen from the beginning. So had these ideas. I think that's what was going on there. And I think there's times when either I or whoever, we ended up putting too much light on the mothership, because you can start seeing the structure, and maybe it's been printed up over the years, on video. But I really liked it when they're mysteries like that, and your mind has to fill it in.
I've been talking to Joe Alves, the production designer on Close Encounters, who worked on Jaws. I'm making a documentary about him at the moment, and he talks about coming up with that idea of the door opening in the ship in Close Encounters, and the little aliens coming out, just because he had a desk lamp stuck on his desk, and as he lifted it, the light kind of shone out in these beams, and it's observing reality, isn't it, that leads you to these ideas quite often. And you're a big proponent of that, aren't you? You like to look at something in reality and observe reality to help you give you those ideas.
Yeah, very much so, and not to copy it. I mean, you want to copy a reality because the movie wants to look real. But who's to say the Close Encounters saucers are not real? I mean, it's just dark. It's nighttime. They could be so bright that for whatever reason, the surface hardly even shows up. Of course they're real, because there they are. They're real lights. They don't look like they're CG lights, right? They still wants to look like it was made for the rest of the movie. And I get in some arguments with Phil Tippett about this. It should never be real, but he doesn't mean that. What he means is, if you make anything real, it's going to be like a documentary. I like documentaries, but in sci-fi films, that I want to learn something. I wanted to learn different. I don't want it to just be like real, but it wants to look like it was, if it's supposed to exist on this planet, then you can cheat that. And like in Close Encounters, you don't have to see in every shot the surface of what those saucers are.
Mm-hmm.
And they're better if you don't. And who knows why they're doing faces, probably for communication. I don't care why, but it transcends your logic and goes back to something as a child when you drew pictures of faces.
Mm-hmm.
And you put eyes here, and Stephen that touches him. I mean, that is who that guy, a big chunk of that guy is. He really has connection to his the source of whoever he is as far as emotion goes,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the other things that I think you guys are amazing at, I'm used to working with people who are really technically minded or really creative, and you kind of bridge that thing. I think, one of the first behind the scenes things I saw was a thing over here in the UK, I think it was in the US as well, called How to Film the Impossible, when they came down and looked at you guys at ILM, and I think you're in production on Jedi and maybe Temple of Doom. And there you are with that modified 35mm stills camera on the minecart, to shoot that stop motion. Just kind of blew my mind, the kind of lateral thinking involved to not only say, right, we're not going to do this on a full set because of economical and efficiency reasons, but also then to be able to come up with a whole new way of doing something that hadn't existed before, or combining things that had existed before but making something new out of them.
Yeah. And it wasn't done on purpose to let's just try a new camera because it's going to look different. It was like, why not do it that way? Because, the set would have been 150 feet long and had been made out of plaster. And if we could make this thing 50 feet long and make it out of tinfoil, right? Then when we're getting in there and we're going to go around a turn and it's not quite scary enough, we can push the tinfoil into the cave more. And for that moment, it's got more surprise and more danger visible. So absolutely, it did give a lot of flexibility also to it.
Well, what do you think is the film that kind of reached the ceiling of optical effects?
Old school optical, I haven't thought about that. Maybe, for us, it was probably scale wise, it would have definitely been Jedi. But as far as the shots looking real or not, there's been a lot of stuff that were going on in the late 80s and 90s that were right there with opticals. But the problem with opticals were the elements, of course, were shot at a different time. And if that lighting doesn't match, which we would do the best we could, and the film stock has to match for the grain pattern to be the same. The edges have to match, so there has to be grain in the edges, not just a sharp edge where the edge is, because then it looks like a matte shot. That just got better and better, but that was like a dead end. And we were never going to do it. And that's one of the things that I kept pushing for digital comping starting in the 80s, because that was always for me, because it was promised, right, for 10 years, and it never really happened. But it was the promise for being able to save a shot. You're doing some sort of miniature effect and it's a water effect and it's great. Then this big blob of water in slow motion comes up and tips off the whole scale of the shot. All you want to do is take that out and the rest of the shot looks great. And how do you do it? You couldn't do it in the old days. You could try making a matte, but you didn't have a background to put it in. The matte would cause other problems. You might see the matte line around it where you're trying to get rid of it. But once you could paint on that film, you could get in the digital world. To me, that was like going to just open up everything for effects to be cheaper and better. And this is not CG. This is just comping. And stunts could be safe because you could have wires in there that need to be hidden. You could change speeds maybe on stuff. You could change the lighting more if something wasn't working. It just seemed to me that this is a great thing. So that was one of the things I was just pushing for all through the late 80s and early 90s to get digital comping in so we could do it.
Yeah, I think back to that same documentary, How to Film the Impossible. And one of your guys is there with like this chart of all the ships that are kind of going to cross each other, and there's a little mark to. I never really understood the kind of limits of optical printing, like exactly how many pieces of film can you sandwich together through an optical printer, or is it purely down to the fact that you reach a ceiling in terms of this now doesn't look good, we need to kind of ramp things back until it looks good again?
No, there was a limit. You could maybe put 2 or 3 pieces of film through one gate, one, and usually I think it was like 2. And then they tried a beam splitter where you could have like two with a mirror, and that kind of didn't work. That worked for simple shots, but like titles and 2-element shots. But what you had to do is you had to take all the elements and double and get a mat of each of them. You pull the mat off the blue screen shot. So you see you've got 60 elements, and some of them have got all these cutout spaceships that aren't moving much, but a lot of them have got real animated ships that are moving right, and they're against blue. So you could get good mats off of them. So you get the silhouettes off of them, get that onto film. Then you could start stacking up, double exposing those silhouettes on top of the same piece of film.
Right.
Over and over. So now you could have one piece of film that's got holdout mats of the 120 shots or chips in it or whatever that came from 60 or 80 or 20 pieces of separate shot film.
Gotcha. Mm.
Then you've got to go back and you've got to burn each one of those back in and block out anything that's supposed to be in front of it. Or else you're just going to have double exposures where they cross over. So it's just horrible. And that was Ken's Ralston shot that was, we still joke about that, what a nightmare.
Mm.
And we did a great job on it.
Yeah. I love that shot. It's so overwhelming, which is what you kind of want to feel at that moment. Like you say, it tells the story, doesn't it? The Empire's kind of attacking the rebels there, and they're overwhelmed, and that shot sells it. When you were doing Empire, there was that period towards the end, I think, that some of you and your colleagues have talked about before, where it was done, and then George wanted a couple more shots added to the end or something. Am I right in thinking that the 70mm print of Empire went out, some of which had kind of less than desirable effect shots in it, like temp shots as such?
Yeah, I remember that. That was, we call those CVBs, could be betters.
Right.
They weren't quite temps. And I think we got past that, and we had something that could be in the show and it wouldn't say scene missing. And I thought, if I remember right, like there were 30 prints they made with, and I can't remember if it was 15 or 20 CVBs in it or something like that. And they just had to, because the 70mm prints had to be made like 2 or 3 weeks in advance.
Right.
And they couldn't print very fast. They didn't have, nobody was printing thousands of prints of 70mm like they were in 35mm. So yeah, that's true. And I don't know whatever happened to those. I never heard about again. I remember they said, don't worry, we're going to send them to cities where, not New York and not LA or not Britain or any place where the critics are. It'll be somewhere and no one will even be caring. They could have easily been right. Nobody cared because it's a sci-fi movie anyway. And maybe we're being too picky on it. I can't remember the shots or not, but that's true. I'm sure they've all faded for now anyway.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Turning magenta and it's gone.
Yeah, I would think so. When you were making those early films with George and Stephen, it always feels like the channels of communication were very open. I mean, with Star Wars, I'm guessing it was telexes and things, and then later on it would have been fax machines and things like that. But given that you were such a small group of artists and craftspeople, that the door was open for you to have this dialogue with the director. As films have become more and more complex, in 20 years we've gone from films of 100 effect shots to thousands, and therefore thousands of people, armies of VFX artists. What kind of disadvantage does that bring with it when you're trying to wrangle all of these different people to create something, that's A, tells the story, B, looks cohesive, and C, satisfies the director?
I can't answer that because I haven't ever worked on those films. And I don't know how I could. I had a limit, and my limit was about 300 or 400 shots. Mm. And if a show was coming in like Willow, where there's going to be about 700 or 800 shots, I'm not going to do this whole thing. I mean, I could do it. Sure, you can do it, but I'm going to lose control. So it's going to then become, these guys do the best they can, and we hope it comes in. But, I know there's going to be a mismatch over here because there's too many shots that have to cut together and speeds are going to be wrong or something. So whatever. So I would split them up. So we'd get 2 or 3 supervisors on it, and we're each dealing with it. And now I don't know how these guys are doing it, but obviously they're doing it. Mm. And I don't know how I could add anything to those movies. You really need, it's got to come from the director or the effects, somebody or other working with 5 storyboard artists, and they're all doing their little sequences and everything. But it's different. It's got to be different, and I can't imagine what it's actually like. And I haven't taken the time to really talk to people, because the generation now that I run into have never worked the way we used to work, where you actually could get in there. You could get in right before you're going to shoot these elements and say, I got a better idea here. Let me change this. And I know the film well enough to know that it'll be okay. And I know that George is going to like it, or Jim's going to like it, or whoever it is going to like it. And we make a little change, and the shot would be better. And they'd look at it and say, yeah, oh, it's great. You improved, terrific. Or, well, I don't care, but we'll make it work. Whereas I saw something, it's going to be better. I don't know how you can do that now, because there's so many elements involved and so many different sets all over the place, shooting at different times, that it's another world. It's much more much more of a management thing. But I think if you've got people who can give a visual style to it, and there probably is something in a bigger emotional arc that a supervisor can add to it, or somebody can, then that's good. But I'm in on the nitty gritty.
Yeah, and it feels like you were there for the kind of sweet spot, where you went through this kind of visceral, tangible, analog world through to the digital world, and kind of got out before it just got too crazy. I mean, you're still like a consultant now.
Yeah,
a
little bit.
Yeah. How do you and did you go about creating your kind of creative health, and allow you to sort of invite these ideas and things whilst being under the pressures of deadlines and also budgets and everything else like that? What did you do to try and maintain that?
The company has been very supportive of me. ILM always has been. So, I've got my two sides. You got to have two sides. You got to have the side that's responsible to the deadline, the money, the all that sort of the reality of it. It's going to get done on time. It's not going to break the bank. It can be done. It doesn't do any good to be putting out ideas that are going to cost too much to do, or actually aren't going to work. That happens. And I fortunately have not been involved in those. I might have been involved in some small ones that I've forgotten that, but I pretty much can see ahead far enough to see if something isn't going to work. And I think it through, and I talk to people, and I'll do tests to make sure that, yes, I think we can actually do this, but without committing unless I know it's going to be done. It's not a matter of, is this little bit going to work at this moment and this test proves it? Is it then going to be able to be replicated 85 times for the entire show, or 400 times for the entire show, with enough talent pool to deliver a movie at that date? That's what I'm really good at, and try doing as much as I can to make sure that everything's going to be there. And I guess I can compartmentalize that. So then I go into the creative side, which is the kid side, and try to figure out what I like and what I think other people are going to like also. And I'm just open to ideas, and some of them are pretty goofy. I remember I had a couple of them on when Jim Cameron was talking about the Terminator 2. He'd say, okay, now this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And it's stuff I'd never even thought of before. And then I'd suggest an idea, and looking back, it was a terrible idea because I didn't understand the character or anything like that. And he'd be nice to say, well, maybe we can do that, but let's see. And of course, it's an hour later or a day later, I'd say, what a horrible idea. We're never going to do that. But I'm open to it. And I've always been open to looking at things and tried to look open and doing things in different ways, which is completely opposite from when in the Cascade days, when everything had to be technical. And I was not a very good stop motion animator, because that wasn't I did it. And I've got some commercials that I animated in, but they don't have any snap, and they aren't really emotionally connected, but technically they're fluid and all that sort of stuff. So that's why I love people like Phil and Jim Danforth and Ray and Dave Allen, the guys that could really do stop motion, or anybody who can do a craft really well, matte painters or whatever, that are just can do it to perfection. I really appreciate that and respect it. And what I want to do is have that work be presented in the movie as the best way it could possibly be. So everyone's work is presented as realistic as it can be, or maybe not realistic, but as powerful and emotional as it can be. So all the time I'm going back about feelings. What do I feel about this? And if I see something like, in inner space, I've always hated Fantastic Voyage. Everybody loves the movie Fantastic Voyage. And I just thought, God, it looks like I'm at stage, 38 on Pico Boulevard at 20th Century Fox, and I'm supposed to be inside of the body. What the hell? And so here comes Joe Dante with this, this going in the body show, and it's a comedy. And I thought, what the heck? Do I fit? I mean, I'm not a comic guy, but I like Joe's work, and I hated Fantastic Voyage, just the way I think it ought to look. Wet, tight, inside, dark, dangerous. But somehow maybe we don't want comedy in it, but we don't want it spectacle. Just spectacle. Occasionally there can be a spectacle, like when he comes upon the fetus, in the film, something where it opens up and you get an emotional. But most of that wants to be something just yucky, just like you cut yourself and you're bleeding. Oh, get it off of me. I don't want that,
And then you earn that bit with the spectacle as well, don't you? It builds up to that kind of moment. Yeah. Yeah,
and you find them in the film, but you don't make everything like this big. You don't work backwards. The way they used to always work was, it seems, from what I've been able to tell, and I think ILM was doing this at the beginning. I'm sure I was involved too. Is you've got storyboards that are done by talented storyboard artists, but those guys may not even know the sequence. What it's like. They don't know a visual style of the film. I mean, in the Fox days or any of the major studio days, you didn't know what the whole movie was going to look like. You were designing these shots of inside the body, for Fantastic Voyage. So someone said, I want this spectacle of inside the chamber of the heart. I really want it. And you've got the director who doesn't really know about effects and has never thought about this stuff much before. And he's looking at these beautiful storyboards and concept art, and I'm sure they were spectacular. We're inside the heart here, and look at this, and look at that. Oh, there's blood cells, and there's our little craft going. There's a Raquel Welch in there, I can kind of see her, whatever is going on. And you're looking, and it's like you can be seduced into that moment and think that's the right thing. But for me, not working my way up through studio departments, but starting from loving films, I see the film as a whole. And so I've always jumped to that. And anything that I can do to keep that emotional experience, for 10 seconds or 20 seconds or an hour and a half is something I would do. And Inner Space was actually a perfect show to do that, And we try to do it all the time. That's why, we kept the T-Rex in the dark when it breaks out of the paddock or whatever you want to call it, the beginning. So there's still a moment of, wait, I think there's a T-Rex. I heard about a T-Rex here. I think it's there. Am I going to see it? And then when you see it, it's not just there, get a reveal shot. So there's places to put those in as long as they kind of fit within the film. And when they fit within the film, then you're telling a story. You're not delivering shots, you're telling a whole story. And that comes back to probably to my early days when I made a little low budget movie when I was started when I was 18 and finished it a couple of years later, called Equinox. And it's actually on Criterion. They bought the original version and the redo version that Jack Harris did. But starting back at that age, I was thinking about this. And at the time I remember thinking with my friend Mark, who wrote it, and Dave Allen, who did the effects also was involved in a lot of, there were really 3 of us made it, literally 3. And the crew would be 2 people and 4 actors. So there were 6 people driving the locations every day to make the movie. But the thing we were always thinking about is, how do we keep this entertaining for an hour and a half? And it was so hard when you're making a movie to keep something entertaining. So it's always something I've been aware of to think of way beyond what I'm working on here, but how it's going to fit in the whole thing. I have so much respect for writers and directors and actors who can keep anything interesting for an hour and a half or 2 hours. It's so hard.
I was watching something about Pirates of the Caribbean, and you were talking about how, on-set motion capture had really allowed actors to be back again, and not being in this isolated room where you're doing an effects shot and actually bringing it onto set. Is that one of the biggest innovations that you can think of that has kind of aided performance as such?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's been great, being able to get them out of this stage somewhere or studio and being able to get them to be on the set with everyone else. Now it's perfect for a show like Pirates. And it's perfect for Lord of the Rings with the Gollum character, because he can just be right there if he needs to be. He can be with the actors. You get into things that are weird shapes, like a giant person, which we still try to do that mocap or doing it, but it's hard because the eye lines never line up. And then the actor who's doing mocap, if he's supposed to be a big guy or a little guy, isn't walking right because his muscles aren't made to be 12 feet high or to be 3 feet high. Then you're into a thing where you have to figure out how do you make it, you mathematically alter it to fit the size, his performance. That'll never look right because his muscle structure is not correct. But you think you solved it until you look at it in the film, and it just doesn't look right. Again, looking at reality, we've seen too many big animals and small animals moving that we kind of know what gravity has done to organisms that grow, and that needs to be kind of treated real, or else you get into magic. And a lot of the Marvel movies are into magic, right? When characters can leap crazy distances, or they can go into other dimensions or stuff like that. So it works within those movies if you buy into that conceit. But the movies that are supposed to be straight, it can take you out of the movies if suddenly there's some sort of way that a character moves or looks or behaves or reacts or changes position or direction or location that isn't something within the rules. It can really pull you out of the film.
Yeah, definitely. I was mentioning T2 a moment ago there. I always think about that being one of those films that maintains that because the technology seemed to be married with the concept of the film, because you've got this kind of semi-mechanical, semi-liquid character in the T1000. And that film, it really does stand the test of time. I look back at that film, and I've watched so much behind the scenes material on that, from Movie Magic, the TV show, to the Blu-ray and the DVD and everything else. So I know some of the work that went into it, but I still buy it as a terrifying character. What do you think it is about that film in particular, along with Jurassic Park, actually, as I mentioned earlier, that has stood the test of time? Is it that kind of sweet spot of technology and kind of imagination meeting in the middle?
I think it's that probably for both those films. You've got the guy doing this incredible thing, like walking through the bars, oh my God, I've never seen this.
Yeah.
But he can't get his hand through because it's holding a gun.
Great.
No?
Yeah.
Great. And it's a reminder, and it means that it's all true and to itself. And he didn't have to. Not only that, you hear the gun hit with a big clank. It's not like he's just sneaking through. So, Jim just really thought that through, and we didn't have anything to do with that, with the creativity of that or the ideas for that. They have that all worked out when they came to ILM. We may have made little things here and there, but not much. But I think that was the technical, or that was the creative side of it that's all the way through it. I'm sure there's ways that I never thought about this. I'm sure there's ways you could tear that movie apart. Like if he's fluid here, he could have gotten out of this situation if he'd gone fluid there. How come he didn't do that?
Yeah, I'm sure. But that actually speaks to how good the movie is, because you don't question that. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't question it, right? And I certainly don't want to now, because I love it the way it is, And maybe it's one of those things like, the ET or the saucers and Close Encounters have faces. Don't ask why. We just don't understand the technology. We don't understand what's going on. So for whatever reason, the T1000 couldn't do this or whatever. And as far as the technical side of T2, we were getting into CG. We could kind of do renderings, but what you're really seeing in most of that show is 2.5D. It's the background plates are shot with Robert Patrick going through his motions. That image, then we could get into the computer barely, but we got it in the computer, and we could wrap it around a CG shape that was sort of matched his head and all. So we were distorting the photography. So when you see him walking through the bars, you're not seeing an all CG Robert Patrick walking through the bars. You're seeing the image of him warped and twisted because it's stamped on with something called make sticky. It made the image that we shot of Robert stick to the 3D shape, which we've been able to make by that time, and deform so it goes through the bars. And that's the evolutionary kind of stuff. You look at stuff that's going on in Willow, we were doing it, but in a 2D way. We couldn't do 3D at that time. We didn't have a need for it, but we couldn't do it. The technology wasn't there at that time. The tools weren't there. The memory wasn't there. The scanners weren't there to be able to bring the images in very well. So I think T2 and Jurassic were perfect. To me, always T2 has been the breakthrough film because there was so much that came together to make that work at all. And it's like, the CG was always kind of up to it, in some ways, but it meant that when we did the CG work on Jurassic, the comping was perfect. I mean, I can imagine clearly what that had been looked like if we'd had to comp those optically. They wouldn't have fit in. They would have been close. They wouldn't have quite, because we could never see the CG dinosaur in over the background before we animated the shot or whatever we were going to do with it. In CG, you can see it comped all the time. So you can change this lighting here. You can change the lighting there for part of the shot because it looks better and like it fits in. And so we were actually lighting to a comp. And nowadays, and I don't know if this is still going on, but one of the efficiency things that people have come up with is don't do that anymore. Just have lots of lights from different places on the CG characters and give them to a comper, and the comper can pick the lights they want to comp it in. Well, that may work, but is it working all the time? Is that part of the reason why the character doesn't quite seem to fit into the background? Because there isn't any change probably going in any of those 12 lights that they gave the comp, or 3 lights they gave the comp, or whatever. We didn't have that burden. We could light it to seeing the comp. And part of what helped also, or that forced it in on Jurassic and T2 and those shots around there for a while, we had no place to go if we got behind. There were not extra printers, there were not extra data storage, there was not extra computers. So we had to get finals all through the show. So meaning on Jurassic, we had to have a final. We had to have, I can't remember the number, but it may have been 2 finals every single week. We had to. And nowadays, especially earlier on, you could wait, you could stall, the director changed his mind, the crew's not finished, they're working on another show, la-di-da-di-da, whatever. At the end, it's amazing. And it did happen that many, many shows got done in the last 3 or 4 months. Suddenly, there's more time, there's more equipment, there's more this. That's how Star Wars was done. Close Encounters was done. Those things were probably every movie ever made was done like that, but we couldn't do it in T2 and couldn't do it in Jurassic. So that forced us to finish shots earlier. And I think from that, we learned what we needed, and we learned what looked right and what didn't look right. And then we still had, 35 months to get the rest of the shots. And I think that was a real wonderful thing to have, and a terrible pressure cooker to be put under, but also it was a guarantee we were going to get the show done. And the crews were so great then, and there was new technology and new ideas that we could do it and still get the good shots. It's not like it started out with bad shots for the first 8 weeks, and before they got better, we were doing really good shots at the beginning, starting with easier ones. And learning as we moved forward to the harder ones near the end of the show.
I just love those movies. They're just a part of my, my childhood, my teenage years. I just grew up with those movies, and I've been kind of semi-obsessed with them ever since. And this podcast is like the latest, machination of that. I'm trying to record these histories with people. Talking of history, right? The industry, the film industry, is not very good at recording its own history. I think, There's been some good documentaries recently, Light and Magic being one of them, that's fantastic. There's also the Academy Museum now, which, is great, but there's, it's fairly sparse still there. There's still more to come, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You've talked in the past about a book of yours, wanting to release a book. Now, he's just disappeared off camera now. He doesn't want to talk to me anymore.
No, this is what I actually had put together. I have it right here. Probably 10 years ago.
Yeah, right.
And I thought I finished it. I sort of finished it 10 years ago. And I said, this is it. This is what I want to get at. And it was a book on observation. And I started looking at it and saying, I don't want to read this. I wouldn't want to read it. I mean, I think it's important, but I'm not a teacher. I don't know how to write. I don't want to do a memoir. I wanted to do something that was going to sort of see, like when you're asking questions, see to get out of me, why does this guy behave the way he does? Because for whatever reason, I like the look, maybe there's some connection, and I kind of want to know what his thinking process is. This isn't quite that, but kind of. It was really about how to look at things and study them and analyze them, and then how to relate them to a film. Oh, it had a lot of that in it. But I've kind of lost interest. My wife, however, is a teacher, and she's been working on it to try to wrap this up next, in the next couple of years or so. But we've been saying that for a long time. It's going to get done in some form, maybe someday. I don't know. But it's just doing talks like this. A lot of that information is coming out, and a lot of the stuff that I had to learn and respond to and work with is unnecessary anymore because of the technology. So, and you don't have to hold images in your head anymore. You can just render them and look at them and then talk about them then. But I do think I think like I mentioned earlier, I think that's a danger. You end up reacting to things instead of being proactive. It's like a computer program that's going to write a script, right? Or a music program that's going to write music. That doesn't work. It's got everything in it, and they've got a great library to grab from, but it's not. One of the reasons you want to be proactive is you want to check yourself and saying, wait, no, I've seen that before. I don't want that. I want to go over here. And then as you go through that process, that's why one person's work is different than another, because we all have different backgrounds. So we all take things in different directions to what we like. And so you get movies you like and movies someone else likes and doesn't like and whatever. So anyway, that book may be coming out in some form.
I hope so. I hope so, because we can talk in an hour and a half that we've had here, and I'm sure we can go into a lot more depth. I'd love to talk to you for another 5 hours, Dennis. It's been fantastic.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Cool. And that's where I'll cut. Thanks, Dennis. That was great. It really is an absolute pleasure talking to you, and you're somebody whose work I've admired for so long. And I managed to talk to Walter Murch last year, and Walter's work to me when I went to college, learning about sound and everything was fantastic. And I've had the chance to talk to him, Gary Rydstrom, and and Oscar winners as well. I mean, I believe you're the most decorated Oscar winner ever.
I think so. That's still alive, at least.
Yeah.
So I think Walt had hundreds of them, or not hundreds, but a lot. But anyway.
Yeah, I guess as a sort of umbrella figure, but yeah. But
I was just watching of Walter. I was watching The Rain People last night. That I haven't seen in years, and I saw the first 20 minutes. And the sound design, which I didn't even know he had done, is phenomenal.
Yeah, right. Movie. I need to watch that again. I haven't seen it.
Almost his first film.
Yeah,
and they're totally boring sequences. This girl in this motel, and the sound doesn't distract, but it's alive, and the whole, and so just to think that that's the thought that he gives to things, and what went on, in all of his movies is just genius.
His, talking of books though, his book, he's actually releasing another book. I spoke to him. We email occasionally. He's hoping to have a book out, I think, by next September. Which is. His book is not a memoir. It's also not an instruction book about how to edit, but it's just his kind of approach. And I think that's what interests people about it. And I'm sure it would be the same with your book, that, here we are able to sort of access the mind of this genius. So I think there's definitely an audience for your book, maybe more than you realize.
So yeah, I think so too. People keep asking about it, and there is. So maybe something will happen.
Yeah, and these days, you can self-publish, and then it's print on demand. But somebody like you wouldn't need to do that.
Yeah, I bought a book out of Amazon, and when I got it 2 days later, the date on the self-publish was the same date I'd ordered it. I couldn't believe it. It's 900 pages on music.
Huh? Because that's the other thing. You can update it as well.
What's that?
You can update those self-publishing books. So whenever one's ordered, you can go, I need to change this bit, and off it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But they have it physically printed the same day.
Wow, that is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
As much as we kind of lament over the existence of Amazon, sometimes you do have to marvel at their ingenuity. And
well, they've shown a new world, that delivery, and that's just phenomenal. We just have to try to bring it into our lives and not have it just be dominated by. But
Yeah. Here, listen. One final question. I know we kind of finished, but I just wanted to ask you this, and I don't want you to get into any trouble. So again, I'm not here to be salacious or anything, but in terms of film history, how important do you think it is to retain versions of movies that have been updated in their original form? You know the film I'm talking about.
I love it. I love looking at old films. I love looking at outtakes. I love that. I think it's valuable. The first time I ever heard of this being done was, if you're talking about on Star Wars, I had heard that Disney was going to redo Fantasia, and Katzenberg had said, we're gonna redo these sequences or cut them out. There's going to be new ones, and the other ones will never be available again, the originals. And I thought, oh my God, how can anybody do this? And this is before Star Wars, any of that stuff was done. So I don't know where George got the idea, if he did or whatever. I can understand it totally from an artist's point of view, though. Totally. And I can see where they want to, and I don't want anybody to see it, but I struggled so hard to learn anything at all. There was no way to learn any of it when I was growing up. I think it's really interesting to see the process involved. And then it's just much more organic, and most people aren't going to care, so they're going to have the finished version, or whatever the latest version is what they're going to have. So I think this stuff ought to be around as much as possible, and I know they have them. I know that a lot of these guys have either kept early versions or they've made videos. In the 80s, they'll keep a cassette of an early cut of a movie. That stuff is around, and maybe they've thrown them out, or maybe they just have them somewhere and they don't know who knows what's going to happen, or the tapes have fallen apart. I got no idea. But it'd be nice to see early versions of, I don't know. I saw an early version of E.T. and it totally didn't work.
Huh.
Totally. And it probably had a little bit more of the work, I don't know, but it was because of the sound. I had all the motors of the E.T. moving and everything.
Sure. Yeah.
And it was like, and I'm not experienced to look past it. I couldn't see past it, right? So I was just looking at my work. But I thought, well, no one's going to like this. I didn't get it, and it's just like showing where my head's at, and I don't know. And I saw a 3-hour cut of The Abyss, which I thought was fantastic. And that he may have released that again. I don't know. But
there was a special edition out there, wasn't there? But it's part of that iterative process, isn't it? Just kind of seeing it change over time. That is, I find it super interesting. Because you know the final product, and it's not going to diminish from that final product. I think it's a valuable learning resource, I think.
Yeah, and something that Al Whitlock, the great film guy, told me, the map painter, he told me one time, I was trying to find scripts, to read scripts. And I asked him if he ever had one. He said, look, I can give this to you, but you shouldn't read it because you're going to think that this is the way the movie is going to be made. But it isn't. These things are all processes. And I thought about that and didn't understand it 2 years later, right? And it's a process. You start out with the best you can, and it evolves and evolves and evolves. And some people go in thinking, oh no, what I did at the beginning is perfect. Most people can't do that. And when they do, it isn't perfect at all. It's just a mess because you can't keep all those thoughts in your head at the same time correctly. And the audiences change all the time too. And everything changes. So anyway, I think there's enough interested people around now that understand how films are made that would all, like, you could do a whole series of classes on that, on the early version of this movie and what it was going to be like and why it wasn't working, and how we had to change the actor after 35 days. You probably know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Why we needed to change that?
Eric Stoltz, yeah.
Because it still could have been a really good movie, but it just wasn't what they had in mind, and it doesn't mean it's bad or anything like that. It's a process, but some people are going to feel hurt by it in a case like Eric and that, but you look at the footage and it's fine.
Yeah.
They're going for something else.
And we can only imagine it the way we know it, right? So it's difficult for us to
But how wonderful to be able to see it differently too.
Oh, it would be amazing.
These guys, Eric's a great actor. There's great actors everywhere. There's always stuff that's going to go on. and you can just learn from it. And
Yeah.
you know,
It's like the only way to put your head into a alternate, parallel universe, really. Watching that Eric Stoltz early stuff, it'd be tantalizing. Cool.
Yeah.
Listen, I've held you for an hour and 40 here. Thanks so much, Dennis. I really appreciate it.
Okay, sure. All right.
Take care.
Okay.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed my chat there with Dennis Murin. It's got to be one of the biggest guests I've had on the podcast. I think him and Walter are up there, aren't they? Walter Murch. Thank you, Dennis, for your time. Next up, I have Rose Doonan. You'll recognise Rose if you watched Light and Magic on Disney+. We're chatting in early December. Yep, I'm laying the track in front of the train at the moment. The documentary Kickstarter has taken up so much of my time, as well as my work for Formula One and recently on some football as well, that I'm a little behind, but rest assured I have guests in the pipeline. We just need to set a few dates, one of which I spoke to today for a pre-interview chat, namely Steve Spaz Williams. Steve is the subject of a new documentary, Jurassic Punk. I'd been trying to get hold of Steve via IMDb, along with Scott, the director of the documentary, but I hadn't had a reply. So then I asked on Twitter if anyone knew Steve, and within 2 minutes, a friend DM'd me with his email address. I emailed Steve a couple of minutes later, and I'm not kidding, within 10 minutes my phone was ringing. It was an American number, and what do you know? It was Steve Spaz Williams himself. We chatted for about half an hour about VFX and rugby and my hometown, his hometown, Toronto, a revisionist history in VFX. He's an interesting guy. And of course, Jurassic Punk, the forthcoming documentary, of which Steve is the subject. So we're setting a date to chat in the very near future. Looking forward to that one. Steve's a pretty wild one, and I'm hoping that I can chat with him and with the director of the documentary in the coming days, hopefully. Do check out our Not Your Average Joe on Kickstarter. We need to get to that target by the 20th of December. Otherwise, we just can't finish this film in this way. We're going to have to find another route, and really would like it if fans support it, because it means so much more. So please support if you can. If you can't do it monetarily, please just share my tweets, my Facebook posts, my Instagram posts, like and share. It all helps. It really does. We need to get it out there to more eyes and ears. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so again for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.